Hi, folks. This is Mark by Mark A. Foster, Ph.D. for the Maoist-Third Worldist Collective. In this podcast, I wanted to focus on the subject of Antifa, not Antifa, as Donald Trump pronounces it. It is Antifa, because with Antifa, you can extend it. It's an acronym into anti-fascism. What do you do with Antifa? Nothing. Anyway, um, I have considered myself as a part of Antifa for a long time, and the idea that fascism exists throughout the world is very, very discouraging, including in my own backyard. And my own backyard is rather extensive because it includes a lot of fourth world Mexican American populations. And it also includes Mexico itself, which is only 2 miles away from me. So I have a really, really unfortunate backyard, a backyard where there is a lot of suffering, a lot of hurt, and a lot of danger. People are literally at risk of losing their lives almost all the time in Mexico. And it brings tremendous pain to my heart to know that. And we read about it in the papers. We know about what goes on in Mexico. Does it affect us here in Hidalgo County, where I live, the warmest county in Texas, right along the Mexican border? No, doesn't affect me. I am not constantly afraid of being victimized by crime. That doesn't really arise in my life. It's not a reality for me. But when I think of the third world, Mexico, and the fourth world, the poor Mexican Americans who live right here in the United States, including in Hidalgo County, that is a reality that I am forced to confront every single day. And it brings me a great deal of tragedy. Tragedy is really the only word I can think for it. It is very painful knowing that that is the case when I am living in a state of comfort, when I basically have nothing to worry about in the world, knowing that there are people who worry about their lives, the lives of their children, the lives of their friends and their relatives all the time. It's a tremendous pain, a tremendous burden on my back. I am willing to bear the burden. I don't care about that. What I do care about are the third and fourth worlds. Unfortunately, Antifa in the United States has mostly focused on the first world, maybe to an extent the fourth world, but not primarily. Primarily, it is focused on the problems, for example, caused by various politicians, such as Donald Trump, and looking at the way in which the Trump administration operated, the kind of corruption that existed in that administration, the way in which Trump was constantly a threat to the lives of people around the world, the fact that Trump might very well be elected again in November of this year. And then I think about the current president, President Joe Biden, who himself is sending money and weapons to Israel to drop upon Palestine. That, to me, should be one of the genuine focuses of Antifa. Why are we the most imperialist country in the world, the head of the tiger, so to speak, contributing in such a continual way to the suffering of innocent people living in Palestine and throughout the world. That question does not really require that much pondering. The United States has been in the position of contributing to the suffering of the third world for a long time. When we overthrew the government of Mossadegh in Iran in 1953, when we are now sending weapons to Israel to drop on Palestine, and perhaps in the future on Lebanon as well, I find the world to be a bit hopeless. I mean, where can hope be found? Not in today's world, and certainly not in the first world, as we ordinarily think of it. So, that is my view of Antifa now. I certainly can't say that I don't care about the problems that are faced by most first worlders. I do. I am a first worlder. I am not a part of the fourth world. And I care about the suffering of people like myself. I do. And I'm not saying that Antifa should simply ignore those things. My concern is that the focus of Antifa in the United States has mostly been on people like me and not on the people of the third world or the people of the fourth world. So I have changed in my vision of Antifa. I used to think of Antifa primarily as a problem for the first world and the way in which the first world operates, and how I, as Antifa, can help to eliminate or at least ameliorate those problems. I no longer do. I am now primarily concerned with the dispossessed, with, as Antonio Gramsci called them, the subaltern, which is really another term for the fourth world. The people who have literally been dispossessed, who have been deprived of their lives, whose children are in constant threat of being killed on a daily basis. That is the fourth world and the third world right near me. And I see it every day. I read about it every day. Although I am not directly impacted, at least not physically, I am impacted by it emotionally because it deeply hurts me. And what is even more painful to me than that is the realization that there is basically nothing that I can do except in a very detached way. I can protest. I can talk about what the IDF is doing to the Palestinians right now. I can talk about what the Mexican drug cartels are doing to the people in Mexico right now. But can I actually change the lives of those people? No, I can't. And so I find myself in a position of helplessness and hopelessness. Because although I can see the problems, although I can recognize the problems that afflict both the third world and the fourth world, there really is hardly anything that I can do to remedy those problems. That, to me, is the tragedy of my life. I don't have to worry about myself. I don't need to. I sometimes do. And in retrospect, when I think about times that I've worried about my life, I feel extraordinarily guilty. What right do I have to worry about my life, to worry about myself, to worry about my problems, which pale in significance to the problems experienced right now by the third world and the fourth world? I have no right at all. And yet, I suppose, like many of us, I often get caught up in my own problems, and I often dwell on them. And those often become the center of my life. And that is a true catastrophe, because really, the center of my life should not be me or people like me, comfortable, in my case, wealthy, white Americans. My focus should be on people who are the subaltern, the othered, the marginalized, who exist both in the United States and in the third world. Now, as a Maoist-Third worldist, I admit that my major priority is for the third world, not for the fourth world, although I care about the fourth world very deeply as well. The reason why I say my concern is primarily for the third world is because I don't think that the first world will be around much longer. Certainly not in its present form. Will there be a first world tomorrow, or next week, or next year? I don't know. But every day when I read the news, when I see the headlines, my optimism becomes less and less. And I genuinely feel as though the world that I live in is crumbling right before my eyes, literally right before my eyes. So I, as a first worlder, cannot depend upon the first world to eliminate capitalism and to establish communism, at least not for the time being. Maybe eventually, maybe. I can't predict the future, but now, no, not at all. Communism can only be established in the third world. Sadly, those in the fourth world, in the United States, who are also suffering greatly, are also a part of the first world. They are thus living in two worlds, the first world and the fourth world. And because of their residency in the United States, or perhaps in other first world countries, their suffering will be shared with the suffering that anyone in the first world experiences. There is no way that they can be immune from that. If the first world is destroyed, which I think may very well happen, that destruction will inevitably include the fourth world as well. And so, as Antifa, I focus on the fourth world. I care about the fourth world. And I want to see the problems of the fourth world eliminated, especially living in a county which is filled with so much corruption. So much corruption. From basically every direction I look, whether medical, whether automotive, doesn't matter. There's corruption everywhere. And the main victims are not people like me, but are people in the fourth world, like where I am, Mexican Americans. They are the true victims of the kind of fascism that we see spreading around the first world. But I need to look past that as much as I can and to focus my attention primarily on the third world. Because there, in places which are experiencing so much horror right now, like Palestine, like Mexico, like Haiti, and so many other places, there, in the lands of the dispossessed, the people deprived of everything that one would ordinarily think is required for a dignified life. There is where communism needs to begin. And so that is my hope. Is it a guarantee? No. The one guarantee that we have, I believe, is that the first world will be annihilated. Why? Because it is happening right now. The dialectic is bringing down the first world. Every single day, we see more and more evidence of it. And I expect that to continue. So the first world will, I think, eventually be no more, at least not in its present form. Maybe it can be reborn into a new kind of society or societies. I don't know. Maybe. I suppose that's a possibility. But the first world in its present form, no, it's a hopeless case. So again, as Antifa, my primary focus, again, is on the third world. And it must be. Whether doing these podcasts or anything else I do, including visiting Mexico, my priority needs to be the redemption of the third world from the imperialism of the first world. And until that happens, there will be no peace and security for me or for anybody else who lives in the world at large. Because the world is, and has been for a long time, spinning totally out of control. So that's basically what I wanted to talk about. My rethinking of Antifa. My switch in considering Antifa as a first world movement, as a movement designed to assist the first world to cope with, to eliminate fascism and all forms of corruption and authoritarianism. That's not enough. That simply is not enough. And that will not bring us any promise in the future. The promise, again, for Antifa must come from the third world. This is Mark by Mark A. Foster, Ph.D. Have a pleasant day and an even better day tomorrow.